Hello and welcome to another episode of Analog Insights. In today's episode, we review the Olympus XA. The camera is famous for combining easy handling with aperture priority mode, a really compact size despite being a full-frame camera, a true rangefinder design, so rangefinder focusing, with an incredibly sharp 35mm f2.8 Zuiko lens. The camera was first introduced at Photokina in 1978 and was then released in May 1979 and sold until 1986. It is considered a masterpiece of industrial and optical design, and it is also the last masterpiece by the legendary designer Yoshihisa Maitani. So the legendary Olympus designer to whom we have dedicated quite a few reviews on the channel here before. And this video also concludes the series about Maitani's cameras. It is important to point out that this video focuses on the Olympus XA, so the original version, and not the later XA2, 3, 4, or 1 versions. As always, we took the camera out on a couple of photo walks, shooting both black and white and color negative film, and can't wait to share the results with you. So let's take a closer look at this camera and see what it can do. The Olympus XA stands in a long tradition of incredibly compact, smart and beautiful camera designs by Yoshihisa Maitani. The XA is Maitani's very last camera design, and it bears quite some resemblance to his first creation, the Olympus Pen, which we have recently reviewed here on the channel, which you can see here in comparison. In contrast to the Olympus Pen, which was a half-frame camera, the XA is a full-frame camera, and arguably it's one of the smallest 35mm cameras that come with all the essential features a serious photographer would need. In comparison, it's just slightly larger and just only half an ounce heavier than the Minox 35GL, which is considered the smallest and lightest full-frame camera out there. The Olympus XA is an aperture priority camera, which only lets you manually set the aperture here in the front and the ISO settings below the lens. and then it automatically selects the appropriate shutter speed and displays it on the left side of the viewfinder. And the shutter speeds here range between 1/500th of a second to 10 seconds, and the ISO settings range from 25 all the way up to 800, and the aperture you can set between f2.8, the widest one, to f22. And that's basically it. What is interesting here is that the camera does offer exposure compensation, so a pretty nice feature for a serious photographer. So in backlight situations, you can simply activate the little lever here on the bottom of the camera and select the plus 1.5 exposure compensation, and you're good in a backlight situation. What is also really important to point out is that in contrast to other cameras of the era, it is not a zone focusing camera, but instead it has a true rangefinder built in and a beautiful rangefinder patch, which you can see here in the middle of the viewfinder. So this is the overview of the beautiful Olympus XA. So now let's take a closer look at how the camera works and its accessories. The camera is turned on by sliding the plastic lens cover open, which not only activates the light meter, but also removes a small slide in front of the rangefinder window. The camera is immediately ready for shooting. In the closed state, it thanks to that plastic cover, has really nice contours which make it easily slip into a pocket or a coat, for instance. So in my opinion, it is a great travel and carry-on camera. The sliding clamshell case is also the case, so there's no additional case for this camera, and the only main accessory that you have is a little fabric wrist strap, which in my opinion beautifully fits the camera and is also really convenient when you carry it around. And you sometimes have the camera in your hands, you just put it on the wrist strap and then you do something with both hands and then put it back into your right hand again. So let's take a closer look at the different sides of the camera. On the front, as briefly mentioned before, there's the aperture setting, and which you can conveniently use with your right index finger even when the camera is up at your eyes, and also the focusing tab below the lens on the front. On the top of the camera there's a red shutter release button, which immediately reminded me of the Aqua Optima sensor release button, a camera which we reviewed on the channel before, and it's kind of hard to tell who was inspired by whom here. In addition, there is a self-zeroing frame counter on top, which is really legible, and as always, a rewind crank on the left, which you can use to rewind your film, as always. The camera's back features a manual thumb wheel to advance the film, which is interesting because it is basically the exactly same film advance that you can find earlier on the Olympus Pen, so Maitani's very first design. And on the bottom of the camera you have a little button to dislocate the film spool if you want to rewind your film. You have a slightly off-center tripod socket, and that special lever that I've mentioned before that gives you three different features. The first feature is the plus 1.5 exposure compensation for backlight situations. The second one is just a battery check, which immediately creates an unnerving, piercing sound, as you can hear here. And the third feature is a self-timer, which basically lets the shutter go off after a 12-second delay. And of course, Jules and I had to test this feature here as well. What is kind of interesting and smart is that when you use that self-timer, it is also kind of working a little bit like a little foot for the camera to stabilize it. And if you don't really have a tripod with you, you can still put it somewhere as we did here, and it's still kind of stable. So really nice and smart camera design. One of the camera's best features is probably its viewfinder. It is really bright and really clear. It comes with a 0.6 times magnification, which is also makes a lot of sense for such a 35mm focal length. And you basically get everything you need. You have bright, clear frame lines. It's really nice. It does have a slight magenta cast to it, and this also creates a great contrast to the slightly yellowish rangefinder patch that you find in the very middle. And here I found it really easy to focus pretty quick, and it's a really beautiful rangefinder design here. On the left side of the finder, we, as mentioned before, see the vertical oriented shutter speeds. So you always get an indication, it's always on. So once you turn the camera on, it remains on, and you always get an indication. And of course, it's warning you of potential overexposure above the 1/500th of a second. And it is important to note that this camera, because of its design and really hardly any distance for the shutter release button, you don't have to travel much of a distance. It basically is tapping the button and then you're good, and you're taking the shot. That you can actually use this camera also shooting rather slow shutter speeds. So we've tried this repeatedly, and it really worked well in my opinion. In terms of accessories, there are 4 different add-on flashes available, which perfectly fit to the side of the camera. So you simply screw that on here, and then it is activated. And in contrast to other camera designs, the XA retains its compact and beautiful design even when a flash is attached. And it also still fits beautifully into many pockets. You don't have this huge chunk of something on top of it, which usually results in a situation where it's hard to put into any kind of bag with a flash attached. In this case here, it's different, and it's really, really nice. Typically, the ISO settings on these flashes range are 2 different ones, so ISO 100 and ISO 400. The Olympus XA comes with an incredibly sharp and really good 35mm f2.8 Zuiko lens. This lens is kind of a masterpiece of optical design in many ways, and it could be best described as a reversed retrofocus wide-angle lens, which is shortened, so to speak. So there's no need for retracting or extending it inside the camera. It just fits in there and it doesn't need to move. And the interesting part here is that when focusing within this 6-element and 5-group design, it is basically the 3rd optical group that is moving back and forth when focusing. And as a result of this, the lens generally has some barrel distortion and also light fall off at all apertures, but generally the optical performance is still good. When shot wide open, the images are pretty sharp, but there's some kind of flare, and also some, you do basically see that it's overcorrected for spherical aberrations. But once you stop down to f4, the flare is almost completely gone, and at least at f5.6 it's really gone. And it's kind of the same with the sharpness. Once you stop down to f5.6 or even f8, the images are incredibly sharp. And to prove this, Jules, as mentioned before, actually did a print of one of the images that was taken at f5.6 here. So what are our impressions? The camera is really well built and lies solidly in your hands. The wrist strap is really convenient and a fitting accessory. It's mostly easy to focus, and the viewfinder is clear and bright. The shutter sound is good. I wouldn't call it or describe it as premium, but it's definitely solid. The camera is, for me, a combination of a small and casual shooting device, and at the same time, thanks to the incredible lens that is built in and the image quality that you get, and also certain features like the exposure compensation for backlight situations, it kind of levels it up a little bit. And for me, it is a great travel camera, and also, in my opinion, well suited for serious street photography, precisely because of that combination of aperture priority, fast shooting, and rangefinder focusing, and still having an incredible built-in lens that creates great results with it. A small downside is that the ISO setting maxes out at ISO 800, so once you push your film to 1600 and 3200, it's hard to get the right settings here, or to tell the built-in light meter how to work. Furthermore, due to the small size of the camera, and this was really interesting, we occasionally didn't know where to put our fingers and ended up having them in the frame. And that happened to both Jules and myself independently from each other. And of course, you quickly get used to that and try to avoid that because it's simply embarrassing when that happens. What's also interesting is that the ultralight shutter release button that I've mentioned before sometimes results in accidentally taking a picture. So this is also something where you start to take a lot of care about. Other than that, the camera is really a joy to use, and I can highly recommend it. And as always, for Maitani cameras, it's always wonderful to look at. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Analog Insights and our review of the Olympus XA, Yoshihisa Maitani's very last masterpiece. If you did, please remember to like this video and maybe even share it with your friends. And if you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe to our channel. Jules, Greg, and I really appreciate each and every subscriber coming our way. So thanks for watching. I hope to see you soon. Bye.